Marta, I'm going to kick it over to you, but Marta's here with Power to the Polls. It's a new partner with us. They're working to recruit poll workers across the country in order to ensure that voting remains easy and accessible for everybody. She's going to have a little presentation on the importance of this and what you can do to become a poll worker. So I'm just going to go ahead and kick it over to you, Marta. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Josie. And thank you for to everyone who is on the call this evening. We got folks from all over, some other West Coasters, which I'm happy to see, a bunch of folks in the Midwest and East Coast and South. So all over, so happy. Oh, Don from Camas, right across the river. Excellent. I'm calling in from Portland, Oregon. So really excited to see everybody on the call tonight. And I'm really excited to be able to talk a little bit with all of you this evening about poll workers, why poll workers matter, what it means to be a poll worker, and why you should think about being a poll worker in your own community. So I've got some slides to share, but as I am pulling those up, I would love everyone in the chat to tell me your guess of how many poll workers do you think it takes to run a general election in a presidential election year. Pick a number, any number, well, your best guess, but I want to hear from everyone in the chat. How many poll workers does it take to run an election in a presidential year? And all right, we got 75 and 100,000. Those are the two that I see. Okay. Well, you will get to stay tuned throughout my presentation and hopefully find yourself the answer to this question. So I will go through these slides that I've got up on the screen, and then we will have some time at the end in case you have, or kind of after my presentation for Q&A. So to start off, as I said, my name is Marta Hansen. I use she, her pronouns, calling in from Portland, and I'm the National Partnerships Director for Power the Polls, which is a national nonpartisan initiative to recruit the next generation of poll workers. I'll tell you a little bit more in a moment about how we came about. But first of all, before we dive into that, I want to actually rewind to the summer of 2020, when, as you may recall, all across the country, there was a huge crisis that started emerging during primary elections. There was a poll worker shortage. If you may recall, it was the first wave of the COVID pandemic. And in, for example, Dallas, 10 polling locations were closed unexpectedly on the day of the primary election because they simply didn't have the staff to keep those polling places open. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, they were down to about a dozen polling places, down from 182 the presidential election prior. So it was a huge, huge concern. It was a huge concern. And so because of that, a coalition of organizations came together to found Power the Polls. So as you'll see on the screen, Civic Alliance, Civic Responsibility Project, Center for Secure and Modern Elections, also partnered with MTV and Comedy Central and a bunch of other organizations to create this nonpartisan national initiative, really with the vision of recruiting the next generation of poll workers, of folks who are interested in ensuring a safe, secure, healthy, and fair election for all voters. It is really the vision of Power the Polls that every person who shows up to vote has people who look like them and speak their language at the polling place, so that voting can be this empowering experience that all of us want it to be. I'm seeing a note from Susan in the chat that there is an echo. I can't see a thumbs up or a thumbs down from other folks, but I've got headphones in, so hopefully the echo is not too bad for other folks. But Josie, send me a note if it is, and I will see what I can do. Oh, great. Thank you, everybody, for that feedback. All right, Susan, we'll get you the transcript offline. Thanks, everybody else. I appreciate that. All right, so back to the origin story. So in less than 100 days in 2020, Power the Polls and our partners recruited over 700,000 potential poll workers in less than 100 days leading up to the general. We had over 400 business and nonprofit partners, and by the time the general election rolled around, there was not a single polling place that was closed due to a lack of poll workers. Yeah, pretty exciting. We had all sorts of influencers, celebrities, musicians, sport or athletes, as you can see on the screen here. So really, what we're focused on doing is both recruiting poll workers, but also creating kind of a cultural moment around poll working and creating the narrative of poll working as like yet another thing that you can do to really be of service to your neighbors and of service to democracy. So what we really learned in 2020 is poll workers power our democracy. In many ways, elections come down to poll workers, to everyday folks who show up to check in their neighbors and pass out I voted stickers and make sure those voting machines work. Without poll workers, people can't vote. And without voting, democracy does not work as it should. Think about long lines, those polling places being closed. And we also know that who this disproportionately impacts, right? When polling places are closed, this often disproportionately impacts low-income communities, communities of color, and rural communities. So poll workers are the backbone. You know, think of all of the get out the vote efforts that you may have participated in. All of those people need some place to go, and that is a polling place, and that needs poll workers. So it is, in many ways, I might argue that it's actually one of the most effective nonpartisan things that you can do to support our democracy. Because again, it's really about focusing on the process of safe and fair elections, rather on any one particular outcome. So the answer to that trivia question at the beginning is that it takes about 1 million poll workers on average to power an election in a general year. So I see Mark and Louise. I'm just kind of quickly scanning through. I think if anybody else picked 1 million, yeah, Cheryl, I agree. Wow. And Carrie, yes, I will respond to that. We do have some celebrity engagement, which is great. But for the folks who picked 1 million, I would like you to please put your zip code into the chat, because we're going to come back for like a real-time show and tell in a little bit. So if you picked 1 million, you win, and you get to put your zip code in the chat. Thank you. All right, so back to the slide, why poll workers matter. I touched on some of these things, but just to really underscore it, poll workers enable the nonpartisan process of our democracy. They're the ones who keep the doors open, not just on election day, but also for early voting and prevent long lines. Poll workers are critical for providing voters information in their native language. We've got a lot of bilingual or non-English speaking voters in this country. And so having access to both ballots and then also people who can help out and point them in the right direction is really important. Ensuring technology functions, and also just making sure that every voter's experience is a positive and empowering one. That is the most important thing that poll workers do. So you heard this big number from 2020, but in 2022, the need still exists. We've been able to have a rapid response program that addresses shortages of poll workers throughout primaries. But as we gear up for the general, there is still a huge need for poll workers. So that's why I'd like to encourage all of you to sign up to support your communities in that way. So a day in the life of a poll worker, I'll walk you through what it means and what that looks like, just so you have some context as to what to expect. So poll workers rise. It is a long day for anyone who has been a poll worker on an election day. Usually it's like a 5 or 6 a.m. wake up call and can go until 9 or 10 p.m. So it is a really, really long day. But it's worth it. You rise and shine. You're the one who sets up the voting stations. Throughout the day, you might have a lot of different types of responsibilities, from checking people in, answering questions, assisting folks as needed, passing out those important I voted stickers. And then you're the one who supports the election administrator at the end of the day to close everything out, ensure ballots make it safely to wherever they're being counted. And really, yeah, you're the one to make sure people know what they're doing, where they need to be, Really welcoming your neighbors. I mean, think about this. Most, if not all of you on the call have voted, I hope. And so, it's really about showing up at your local fire station or place of worship or community center or the local elementary school or sports stadium. And it really is this experience of you and your neighbors, and poll workers help make that happen. So again, poll workers that, do a lot of things, and this gets a little bit more into some of the specifics. Some states have same-day voter registration, so you would be registering voters, maintaining a safe and orderly polling place, especially if there are really long lines. You can help provide assistance, especially if there are elderly neighbors or differently abled neighbors or folks who need language access support. So it really is, in many ways, it's like a kind of customer service type role somewhat, to really just like be supportive and make sure that you are being responsive as various needs arise. So how to become a poll worker. You can sign up at powerthepolls.org, but actually don't use that URL, use the URL on a slide or two from now, specifically because it will then be credited towards Center for Common Ground, because that's how you came in. So basically the process is, and I'll get to show you this in a minute, when you sign up at Power the Polls, we will direct you to your local jurisdiction's application, and you get to complete the application there. So what is great about Power the Polls is, on the call tonight, we've got folks from all over the country. There are 5,000 election jurisdictions all across the country, and each has their own leader and process for voting and making elections happen. So when you sign up through our, thanks for dropping the link in, Josie. When you sign up through that link, you will be redirected to the local elections office for, if you're in DeKalb, Georgia, or Camas, Washington, or Kenosha, Wisconsin, wherever you are, you will be directed to that website with a big button that says apply here. And so that is the application that goes straight to the election administrator's office. And you also get entered into the Power the Polls system. So we will then send you some reminder emails for completing your application. We'll share information on what the hours are, what the expectations are, how much you get paid, because most poll workers are paid. Usually it's a couple $100s for the day, and any other information you need. So once you apply with your election office, then they will hopefully place you, and then Power the Polls will also provide some resources that will help prepare you to go to your training that is hosted by your election administrator, and they're the ones who train you on local regulations and what the process is if different folks show up, and I'm happy to share some of those resources later if you're interested. And then once you complete the trainings and are placed, you get to show up on election day and really make voting that positive, empowering experience for everyone that we talked about. So a couple of just things to consider. Different states and jurisdictions have different rules around becoming a poll worker. In some places you can be as young as 16. In some places you get paid $80, and other places you get paid $300. In some places you have to be registered in that state, and in other places you have to be registered in that specific jurisdiction. So it really depends. And once again, Power the Polls makes it easy, and we'll pull up all of the information specific to your location. And I can dig in to any of these more for if folks have questions. So those are some of the eligibility considerations. So my big call to action for all of you is for you to help us power the polls. This year in particular, we are hearing a huge need for multilingual poll workers, tech savvy poll workers who can help, work with a tablet and or troubleshoot voting machines, and also people with availability to support early voting. So, if you can't maybe show up on election day or don't have the physical ability to show up for a whole day, helping out on an early voting day on like a weekend leading up to election day is also very helpful. So how you can help, Josie dropped this link in the chat, powerthepolls.org/CFCG. Thank you, Francisco, for signing up now. I love to hear this. We also encourage you to share the link with family and friends. And if you are a community leader in your own community, maybe in like a Rotary Club or a community of faith or like a roller derby group or anything like that, we've got all sorts of different types of partner organizations that are working with us to spread the word in their communities about the importance of being a poll worker and just how easy of a process it is to apply, and just how central of a really like a cornerstone it is to our democracy. And then also, if you're someone who employs people, you can consider policies supporting paid time off to be a poll worker. That's something that we work with our corporate partners a lot about. And then also Power the Polls offers a variety of resources. So a bit powerthepolls.org/resources, we've got some more in-depth like day in the life of being a poll worker, questions to ask at your training if you're selected. We've got a couple of other resources as well that I'm happy to share. So that's the end of my official presentation. But I know that there's been some questions coming through in the chat. So maybe what I'll do, I'm going to stop the slide share and I will start scanning through these questions. And then in addition to that, if anybody has a question they'd like to raise their hand and ask, you're more than welcome to. And once we go through some questions, I will maybe screen share again and walk us through the process of signing up, just so you can see how straightforward it really is. Okay, so scanning through some questions. So I saw a question about, all right, I'm just gonna scan through here. All right, so bottom up. So Debbie asked, can you describe the training in general, time commitment in person? It varies from place to place. That is actually a great question. And you know, Debbie, I am going to use that as an opportunity to actually do do the screen share of how to get data if you need to. So hold please. Screen share once more. All right. Okay, so I am screen sharing again here. So this is a nifty place on our website that is just powerthepolls.org/search. And you can type in any zip code in the country. So I'm going to type in Mark's zip code here. He had been one of the folks who guessed 1 million poll workers. So look up that zip code. He's in Maricopa, Arizona. And so we pull up this information and it has everything that Mark needs to know about being a poll worker in his jurisdiction. The hours and compensation. So in Maricopa, it's 5:30 a.m. to about 8 p.m. and starts at $12.80 an hour. You have to live in that jurisdiction, but you can be as young as 16. And so for them, they have training information here that has in-person and online components, which typically lasts 3 hours, in-person and online about 1 hour. And then there's the contact information down below, as well as the link to complete the application. So that's one example. Let's go back to powerthepolls.org. And this time let's type in Luis's zip code. Luis, I'm gonna, interesting that it has, oh, I see, one is misspelled. So there we go. I'm gonna submit that as a help request. So we've got this. So in Hanover, Virginia, we've got a start time of 5 a.m. End time after the polls close at 7. It sounds like compensation here in Hanover is more of a flat rate than it is in Maricopa, where we looked at before, but you can be from anywhere in the state. So in Virginia, you know, if Louise, like if her jurisdiction is full, she can go somewhere else. And then training details. So here there's a requirement that poll workers are certified for 3-year terms. And the training is required once every 3 years. So again, to answer that question that I think was from Debbie, if you want to know the specific information for your jurisdiction, you can type in a zip code. Let's type in one more. Catherine is the next one that I see. I think, okay, so this is actually, okay, this is great. So Palo Alto, Santa Clara County, has, you know, different rates. You can see that they're paid slightly more than the Arizona voters. cost of living is higher, I'm sure. But here they also have different rates for additional funding for bilingual poll workers, and they also pay for training. And just kind of scanning through here, again, people who are 16 years old or older, or lawfully admitted for US permanent residents. So this is actually great to know, because some jurisdictions you don't have to be a voting citizen to vote. It can be anybody at all, or I'm sorry, to be a poll worker, rather. You don't have to be registered to vote to be a poll worker. And here they have training details that are, 2 to 5 full days, right? So it really, as you've seen from these examples, very, very much depends on jurisdiction. So I definitely encourage you to look up your own jurisdiction if you are interested. So Debbie, I hope you answered that question. For the person who just asked that your location is full, can you go elsewhere? Go ahead and search your zip code, and that should have information as to whether, or even like a nearby zip code to look up and see if there is that flexibility there. Okay, scanning through. Edna, I'm glad that you think poll working is rewarding. That is fantastic. So Stacy had a question about being registered in Washington, where we vote by mail. So I am from Oregon, which is also vote by mail, which is deeply disappointing because there is no need for poll workers in Oregon, Washington, or Hawaii. So which are, because we have really progressive voting legislation, which tries to make voting as easy as possible, but because of that, we don't have the need for poll workers. So what I have been able to do is, if you follow Power the Polls on social media, occasionally or pretty regularly, we will put out calls for needs in different areas. So there's like a huge need in Philadelphia right now, and in Boston, and in like Yolo County, California, where UC Davis is. So what I've been doing is, every time I see one of those social media posts, if I have any friends or family in that area, I will share it with them and encourage them to share that with their network. So that's probably what I would do for you if you are unable to vote or unable to be a poll worker, because your state is all vote by mail, is help to really spread the message and encourage folks who are in places that do have needs to sign up. All right, I am looking at some of these other questions. I hope that I addressed some of these when I showed you that powerthepolls.org/search. So you can look for your specific location information. So Nancy asks about the reasoning for requiring people to work the whole day and not in shifts. That's a good question that I don't know the answer to. I imagine that it's about consistency and not, and just being able to have like consistency over the course of the day, rather than having like a shift in the middle of the day. Usually there are the busiest times are usually in the morning and in the evening, and there's usually kind of a lull, maybe late morning and then mid-afternoon. Because a lot of folks will come, before dropping their kids off, or after dropping kids off from school, or after getting off of work. So I imagine it's something around trying to remove a logistical concern of changing the guard in the middle of the day, as it were. All right, other questions. So Toby pointed out that there was a place in Maryland that was looking for people to be in a chief judge role. Yeah, so some places do have needs for longer term folks who are like seasonal workers or more election clerk type roles. Some of that information is available if you use that search function to type in your zip code. If you're interested in like a slightly bigger capacity of being able to contribute and get paid to do it, you can see if there's a need in your area. We aren't hearing that as much, but that's definitely something that is there. So Edna asks a really good question about, we have election deniers being trained now as poll workers in swing states, and how do we combat that? Absolutely. So I think that is something that we have been talking with election administrators a lot about, and with a lot of our partner organizations as well. And honestly, that's why poll worker recruitment is so important, because if an election administrator, they've been telling us that they need big, that they need like a big pool from which to draw, so that they have really quality poll workers that they are able to select. For example, if an election administrator needs, say, 50 poll workers and they get 50 applications or 40 applications, they sort of have to take who they have. Whereas if an election administrator needs 50 poll workers and they have 100 applications, that gives them a lot more flexibility to make sure that it's people who are from the neighborhood, who are, you know, like well-intentioned and want to be there and really show up. So I think especially and that's especially, I think, important from what I've heard in states where people can be from anywhere in the state. But I think, again, what we've heard from EAs is that's why they just want the more people, the better to apply, so that they have that big pool from which to choose. And I will say a heartening note is that we've actually heard quite a number of people who maybe haven't been poll workers say, you know, I am someone who really regularly, you know, volunteers in my local school district, or, you know, shows up at the library, volunteers for my neighborhood association meetings. And I'm not necessarily political myself, but I believe in the process of democracy. So I'm going to take this as a call to step up and give back. So we have been hearing that a lot and getting a whole bunch of new folks in the system. There are a lot more people who want democracy to work as it should than there are people who do not. And so it's just a matter of making sure that those are the folks who feel called and activated by the opportunity to really give back. So that's how I would respond to that. So there is, all right, some other questions coming through. Yeah, Josie, thank you for clarifying that. So think of Power the Polls as like the central clearinghouse. So instead of, you know, saying to all of you, do a Google search of what is the poll worker application for Los Altos, California, or for, you know, Maricopa, Arizona. Instead of having you all try to do a Google search and find your local election administrator's website, we have put all of that information in one place. So when you sign up through us, we will point you to where you need to go. And so you go there and fill out the application there. The application is filled out with your local election administrator. So it'll be redirecting you to their website. And that's where you actually apply, are selected, get contacted, and get trained. Like all of that happens with the election administrators. All right, Debbie, I have no idea what adopt a poll is. That's a new one. That's a great question. I will have to Google that, or ask some of my colleagues and let you know. Aaron asks, is a poll worker called an officer of elections? So the other confusing thing about this is that the language is slightly different in many places. So like usually, I would say general language tends to be the following, although it differs from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Usually poll workers are like one day only, or like one season only temporary people, everyday people who show up and just help out on election days. Poll election officials or election officers or election administrators are usually folks who work for the county and actually oversee elections there. There's also something called poll watchers, which some organizations are doing, that are not people who are like helping with the process of democracy, but more folks who are like legal observers, or folks who will just like observe the polling location to make sure nothing odd is happening. So that's more of a poll watcher type role. And you may hear a little bit more about that with some election protection information later in the call. I will also say, yeah, so there's a lot of different types of language, but it can vary from place to place. We're at the half hour, so I want to pass it back to Josie and the Center for Common Ground team. I'm happy to stay on the call if there are additional questions or if there is more time, but in the meantime, I will type my email in the chat. So go ahead and send me a email if you have any questions at all. And Eloise, yes, I will drop the Power of the Polls social media in the chat as well. So follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and LinkedIn, where we share regions with needs that we would love for you to help amplify. And with that, thank you so much for all of your interest and for giving me the space and for asking all of these great questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Marta. This was great. I know I learned a lot and I'm really excited. I even Googled adopt a poll for the person who was asking, and it looks like it's something where your organization or nonprofit can sign up to work at the polls, and instead of being paid yourself, the money goes to the organization that you're working with. So that's pretty cool.
That's
The
amazing.
more
That's
you know. But yes, thank you again. This was really, really wonderful. Again, don't worry, folks, if you didn't catch all the links in the chat. We will be sending up a follow-up email with all the links that you need to sign up to be a poll worker or to look up your zip code. Yeah, I think for now, what we'll do is transition just a little bit to talk more about what some other things are that you can do in your community on the ground to help your elections. And Andrea, I don't know if you're feeling up to talking about CSA or not. Otherwise, I can try to do that.
Oh, thanks, Josie. My voice is pretty bad, and as you can see, the internet has kicked me off Zoom, but my trusty phone is hanging on. So I'll give people a little background on our program, See Something, Say Something. I was working with our board member, Deepak Puri, back in 2018, and I explained to him that people who wanted to do poll watching, whether they were doing it officially or unofficially, needed to have a tool where not only could they write down problems that they saw with voting, but they could also include a photograph or a short video. So our program, See Something, Say Something 2018 was born. So Josie, I don't know if you are ready to share CSA2020.com. That was the version that we used for the presidential election. I like to let people see that because in that you can see many of the real issues that people reported about problems with the elections. And when you look at the program, it's designed to let you look at what were the kind of problems that occurred nationwide, or you can even look at an individual state. So, Josie, I don't know if you have it up, but in Washington State, near Seattle, there was this incredible report about ballots, voted ballots, being thrown down a storm drain, and the person actually took a photograph. So this is the reason why See Something, Say Something exists. We normally tell people, go ahead and call your 866 Our Vote hotline, but please understand that depending on where we are in the election, if it's election day or the final weekend of early voting, you could be sitting on hold 10 to 20 minutes before someone is able to take your call. So we normally tell people just fill out the form, See Something, Say Something on your phone. And then when the operator comes on the line and they want you to tell them what happened, you can literally, if you want, read them the report that you created in See Something, Say Something. Now, we normally work with the Lawyers Committee, the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. This year, we may add Common Cause. And if we get something that's really big, we're going to refer it directly to one of the election protection partners. But in addition, or rather than just making a phone call, now we will have additional documentation. We may have a photograph. We may also even have video. I'm going to give you a website. We decided we wanted to create a permanent web link so that every year when we create a new version of Say Something, we can just give people one link. And here is the one link for the latest version of the program. Now, I show you 2020 because that's got a lot of information in it. CSA 2022 doesn't have a lot of information in it yet. So here is the universal Say Something link. voterprotect.live/say. So SEESAY. See something, say something. One of the things we added to Say Something 2022 was we've always had voter intimidation. We are now very concerned about election official intimidation. So that has been added to the newest version, Say Something 2022. So again, I'm sorry I'm not on Zoom with you, and my voice is terrible. I'm on vacation with my grandchildren, and both of them have runny noses. And for me, those little runny noses have finally transitioned into a really bad sore throat. So any questions that anybody has, we will do a full show of Say Something in the coming weeks. I'll get Deepak to join us, and we'll be recruiting people to monitor posts on Say Something in the back end. But again, tonight is all about what you can do for elections in your own jurisdiction. Because while we love that so many people are really concerned about our focus states, we also know that people have a concern about their own local polling stations.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrea, for talking about this when you're not feeling well and on vacation. Again, stay tuned for a webinar that will go more into detail about this, and you'll still get all these links in the chat. But I shared my screen for a bit. I was trying to find the Washington state post on CSA 2020, and I couldn't find it just yet. But there really is, if you just go through the 2021 and see all the things that people reported, it's really amazing and somewhat troubling, but great to have a place for you to be able to report that. I think we will do a little short transition away from what you could do in your own community to give folks a quick update on our texting, phone banking, and postcarding campaigns, as Virginia early voting starts next week on the 23rd. So we've really hit the ground running. It's now officially election season, and we've got quite a few things going on. If you have questions throughout this, you're able to turn on your camera and unmute yourselves now. So feel free to raise your hand if you have questions throughout this. Edna, what will be done to protect poll workers in swing states? Andrea, I don't know if you have a question about the answer to this directly. I know that Common Cause is doing some work to recruit poll watchers, nonpartisan poll watchers across the country to make sure that poll workers and voters are protected and to report any issues. But I don't know if Marta or Andrew has another answer to that.
Well, there's basically normally 3 national organizations where this is one of the big things they do. The Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law, Common Cause, and then also the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. So in 2020 and 2018, we worked with all three of those organizations, and they got a special code so that anybody that was one of their poll watchers, if they reported something on See Something, Say Something, it would come in with a special code and it would bypass our layer of review and literally go straight to their organization.
And
So yes.
Yeah, and
then the Democratic Party also runs election protection as well. And sometimes they kind of sort of coordinate with the Lawyers Committee, and sometimes they don't.
And Marta, I think, also has the answer.
We will always be part of the nonpartisan work.
Yeah, and building off of what Andrea said, the other thing that I'll just name is, unfortunately, voter intimidation has been a part of our democracy for basically as long as democracy has existed, right? So there is a very distressing and also long history of voter intimidation at the polls. Obviously, the landscape this year is, and kind of in this era, is different than we have seen before. And also, election administrators have, for many, many decades, had to think about voter safety, poll worker safety, election security, things like that. So there definitely are, as Andrea mentioned, there are a lot of folks thinking about this and working on this and really trying to put together resources. And then one of the other things that I'll just say, to put in a plug for some of the resources Power the Polls has to offer, once you sign up through our site, in addition to directing you to your local administrators page, we will also, starting next month, later this month, early next month, sharing out a series of resources that I mentioned before, but that also includes things like problem solving at the polls. So everything from, basic tactics around maintaining kind of a safe and positive environment, de-escalation skills if that's necessary, how to deal if there are people who are being disruptive, or if there are long lines and people are starting to get antsy, just like what are the things to be aware of and to know about. Who do you call? What are all those great phone numbers that Andrea mentioned? So you will not be facing any of this alone. And this is something that a lot of folks are thinking about and preparing for, and are like very, very deeply committed to ensuring is something that is addressed both beforehand and on the day of. So thank you for that question, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that was a really great question. And I think I'm going to really quickly just link in the chat, the Becoming an Election Protection Volunteer with Common Cause. This is something, if it's not possible for you to be a poll worker in your community and you can't travel to go somewhere else, this is another alternative for something that you could do on election day and during early voting to keep your community safe and your elections safe. So
now, one of the important distinctions about being a poll watcher as opposed to a poll worker. Poll workers work generally inside the polls, and these are positions that are paid for by the local county board of elections. Poll watching is normally in shifts. It is also normally volunteer.
Yeah, it is volunteer. Yeah. All right. Any other questions related to that? CSA or being a poll worker? Great. Okay, well then I will do a quick, Gabe is not here to do our phone banking update, so I will quickly get into that and then pass it on to Nancy and or Carrie to give a short postcarding update. But we are calling Black voters across Virginia getting them ready to vote early and asking them to get out the vote. And we've also started calling 2 counties in Georgia as well, as their early voting starts on October 17th. So if that is something that you are interested in participating in, it's something that you can do on your own. The link that I just put in the chat has a great video on how to get started, but we also host national guided phone banks twice a week that are great. They're fun. And it really makes a difference, even if you're leaving a voicemail. So I highly, highly recommend participating in one of our phone banks. We need more people doing it, and it is the most effective thing that you can do besides, being a poll worker. So that's
and or knocking on doors.
And or knocking on doors, true. If you can't do anything on the ground, the next thing that's really important to do is to make calls to voters. Other than that, another thing that's very important to do is send postcards. So I'm going to pass it on to Nancy or Carrie.
Yeah, thanks, Josie. So Carrie and I are both in the National Postcard Team. So some people have been writing postcards to us, but if you haven't, we're basically writing postcards to infrequent Black voters in our 9 focus states. And that is people who did not vote in the last midterm. They're registered to vote, but they hadn't voted in the midterm, and we want to encourage them to do that. And we have messages that are designed by the people who are on the ground, the community of color leadership on the ground in each state, because each state has slightly different issues. The postcards, of course, are nonpartisan. Right now, we're writing to Virginia, Georgia, North Carolina, Texas, Florida, and Arizona. And soon we'll be also writing to Alabama, South Carolina, and then finally Louisiana. It's really fun. We do ask people to handwrite the postcard. We're requiring people to use our own culturally sensitive postcards designed for our voter population. And then we provide the addresses and the script guidelines, and even a picture of the sample postcard for that state that you're writing to. A lot of people like to do it on their own. You can usually do about 10 an hour, maybe sitting while you're watching the news or in the evening. And a lot of people like to do it sometimes after church with a small group, or just in an evening, drinking coffee or a small amount of wine and writing those postcards. It's a really nice social event, and it works. It is effective. So the question then people ask is, how do I get involved? It really depends on where you live. We have regional organizers in every single part of the country, although sometimes the regional organizer is covering a large area, not necessarily near where you live. And some people have postcards or packets that you can pick up on their porch. Other times you will get your own supplies. So we'll post in the chat a list of regional organizers, and depending on where you live, contact the person in your state or county, and they will get you started. And there's information on our website, so we'll give you that too. But we've written almost 2.25 million postcards this year so far, and we're expecting probably another million in the next couple of months. We're going to keep postcarding through late October for the current states that we're doing, and Louisiana, strangely, has its election December 10th, so we'll probably postcard them through middle or late November. But we sent 1.4 million postcards for the primary in these states, and so far we've sent, I think, about 840,000 postcards for the general election. And it is really, really fun. We have a nice video you watch, look on our website for the resources, look at the guidelines, and really just connect with the person who's in your area. And we'll send the links out in the notes when we come back.
Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, our postcarding team's amazing. All the volunteers that coordinate across the country to get you the postcards are wonderful, and they do make it super easy for you, and it really does make a difference. Andrea, I'm going to quickly also just drop, we are starting texting into Virginia as well. If that is something that you are interested in doing, please fill out this form and let us know if you've texted on different platforms before or not. Once you signed up with this form, I will get in touch with you about when we have different upcoming trainings so that you can get started texting on. What we're using right now is Outreach Circle. And this is to Virginia voters. It just launched today. So now's the time to get started. And I think that's pretty much everything. Maybe we'll even end a little early. You can get 8 minutes of your evening back. Unless anybody has some questions. Andrea, if you have any final things you'd like to say.
I do. I'm
Take
going
it
to
away.
say for postcarding, we've had people as young as 10 and as old as 100. So it's very difficult to be too young. So we've had grade schoolers and middle schoolers work with their parents on postcarding. And we've also had seniors work on postcarding. Our 100-year-old basically doesn't write the postcards anymore, but what she does is she puts the stamps on and the labels.
That's really nice.
Just thought I'd throw that in.
I think that's the perfect way to wrap up the evening. The work that we do is really for anybody and everybody. We try to make it as accessible and fun as possible. So if you haven't already signed up to send some postcards or make some calls, now's the time to do it. Andrea, I hope you feel better. Thank you everyone for being here tonight, and to Marta again for this amazing presentation. It seems like from the chat, we've got a few more people signed up to be poll workers, so that's incredible. Yeah, thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all so much.
All right.
Thank
you,
you,
Marta.
Marta. I am so glad you
Yes.
joined us.
Thanks for having me. What a treat to be here.
Thank you. All
Thank
righty.
you.
I'm going to stop the
night.
recording. Good night, everybody.